incredible frontline workers and healthcare workers who are caring for patients, who are away from their own family members to care for patients, to ensure that we provide clinical care and maintain other essential services that must continue. And we support countries in adapting those strategies as the situation changes. So when cases, before we've talked about the different transmission scenarios, countries that have no cases, that have their first cases, that have clusters of cases, and that have community transmission. So as countries move through those different scenarios, as intensity increases, but in addition to that, as intensity decreases, how do we support countries in adapting those strategies so that they can make sure that they're continuing to suppress transmission and control these outbreaks? So there's a lot that we're doing on a daily basis, but it's through that support and it's through that direct engagement that we have through our country offices and our regional offices to be able to do that.
Thank you very much. Next question will come. We go to Kai Kupferschmidt from Science. Kai, can you hear us?
Yes, Tariq, thanks a lot for taking my question. This follows on from one of the earlier questions. I'm curious, when you see, protests like the ones in the US against the measures, I mean, obviously WHO does have some experience, in dealing with them, for instance, during the Ebola outbreaks in West Africa, also in DRC. I'm wondering whether, maybe Mike, you can talk a little bit about, what you've learned from these experiences about how best to deal with this.
Thanks, Kai. I think, all situations are different and all societies are different. And but I've said it many times in the past. One of the keys to epidemic control or emergency management in general is the level of trust between citizens and government. It's a hugely important investment in the bank of emergency response. Because when you ask people to do something on trust and to end their social life, end physical contact, return to their homes, they have to fundamentally believe that somebody has a plan. There's a reason for this, and there's a reason for doing it, and there will be an end to this. So, and it's the same when you ask someone in the Democratic Republic of Congo to go into an Ebola isolation facility or ask their families to self-quarantine. Very similar situation. And there can be misunderstandings in real time if communities don't understand the purpose. But also, and we've seen this in Congo, where communities can be gamed and have been, in many cases in my experience, there are what are genuine community concerns, if not properly addressed, can lead to tension and lead to misunderstanding and often to negative reactions, which are counterproductive to the control of the epidemic. But also there are many situations in which those reactions and community sentiments are gamed and directed in a way that is counterproductive. And I've certainly seen that in many epidemic events in my time as well. So it's really important that we listen to what communities are saying. It's really important that we understand communities' frustrations. But it's also really important that we then re-engage with those communities to explain why the public health strategy is there. What is the purpose of that strategy and how they are contributing to that. And that's a process of dialogue. And sometimes when we talk about communication, it seems that we talk about one-way communication, what we tell people. So we tell you to do something and then everyone magically goes and does it. That's not necessarily the way things work in all societies. Certainly in my experience in Africa and in Asia and in the Middle East is very much about creating a dialogue where there's a two-way communication, where communities can ask questions, communities can understand what's happening, and there's a transparency around what is happening, and that people can actually understand, and there is no confusion between the different levels of the system, and there's a consistency in that communication. It's very easy to become confused if you're hearing one thing from one side, one thing from another side, someone else is telling you something else. You're in the middle suffering, and you get frustrated. And it's very easy to manipulate that situation. And it's really important that governments at all levels and in all countries really take on that role of communicating effectively with communities in a two-way dialogue, and that we also engage civil society, we also engage non-governmental organisations and others, and then it's not purely governmental in nature. So yes, communication, dialogue, understanding, persuasion, these are the words we need to be talking about, and empowerment. Many situations, in my experience, communities have felt disempowered by the process, and they want to take action, they want to be involved, and we need to be able to give communities things to do. I see what's many situations now around the world in COVID where, like, for example, in South Africa, where community health workers are being trained. They're the people on the streets. They're the ones who know the local families. They're the ones who know the local community. They're the ones who can educate and engage. You see the same going on in places like Massachusetts in the US, where you see that same kind of approach to driving community-based approaches. So I think there are good examples around the world where communities can be effectively engaged, and then when communities understand and participate, there tends to be less tension. That's been my experience, Kai, but it's very hard to make comparisons between countries and between communities.
Yeah, just a bit. I fully agree with what Mike said. It's at the end of the day the trust between governments and citizens that will help. Even now, I mean, the protests and gatherings in the middle of the pandemic will not help. It will only fuel the outbreak. So we need to use several ways of communication with our citizens. We know how to communicate and help them understand. And I think it would be a good idea to mobilize community leaders here, civil society, religious leaders, to speak to citizens directly, not only just governments, but all public leaders, all community leaders and religious leaders should be involved, and bring the different opinions actually into understanding, especially around this pandemic. This virus is dangerous and it affects everybody. And there should be that understanding, and whatever precautions we take, it is for all of us, for each of us and the whole public in general. At the end of the day, people will understand and cooperate, but we need to use all means we have to have clarity in our message and ask for cooperation using all means that's available, and especially through the leaders they trust, including religious leaders, as I said earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go to India today. That's Geeta. Can you hear us, please, Geeta?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my question. My question is to Dr. Tedros. Dr. Tedros, while the WHO is not an enforcing agency, it does do a lot of research and assesses and produces reports. So in that, would the World Health Organization be looking at forming a team to investigate the origins of the virus, look at maybe sending a team to China with independent stakeholders as part of that entire investigative team? And also the United Nations has come out with a report saying that stringent lockdowns in developing countries could lead to economic catastrophe. What is your assessment on that, particularly vis-a-vis India?
I think it's very, very important that we understand the animal origins of this disease, not least because it's clear the animal-human species barrier has been breached once. It can be breached again, and we need to understand where that has come from, what are the factors that have led to that, and how that can be prevented in future. So that's good public health, that's good science. And we have certainly offered that assistance to the government of China, but also working very closely with our colleagues in FAO and OIE across a One Health platform to do that. Peter Van Emmerich is the scientist who leads our operations on that here, and we have a team working specifically on those issues and very closely with OIE and FAO. And we'll be delighted to work with international partners and at the invitation of the Chinese government in order to carry out a really good investigation around the animal origins and really understand all of the factors associated with that. And we very much look forward to that opportunity. With regard to lockdowns, absolutely. Lockdowns should and can be avoided in many circumstances, and many countries have implemented different versions of what you might call lockdown, and that's been how do you get the maximum suppression of disease with the minimum amount of physical distancing and restriction of movement and stay-at-home orders. The way you do that is to really focus on case detection, on finding cases, on testing, on isolation and quarantine, and on being very, very aggressive in investigating clusters of cases that emerge, particularly those that emerge in special circumstances, in high-risk communities or in special environments. That is the challenge, is the lockdowns may be providing a suppression on the disease, and we get to a point where the disease looks like it's under control. If you follow that up, as I said, South Africa have really followed up their lockdown with a very, very extensive campaign of training health workers for surveillance, doing surveillance, 39 mobile labs. What they're doing is backing up the lockdown with a very strong public health response. And as they put that in place, you can start to ease the lockdown while helping people with their lives and their livelihoods. You can start to ease those lockdowns because you have something else to replace it with. The danger is easing these so-called lockdowns without a replacement strategy. That's the real danger. And there's always a danger, even with the replacement strategy, that there will be outbreaks. But they can be managed, I believe. But exiting lockdown without a strong public health strategy and a strong strategy to strengthen your health system is going to be difficult. I believe India is making progress towards that. I've said it here before. India has a proud history of strong public health surveillance in smallpox, in polio, and for TB and other diseases. So I don't believe there's any reason why the public health capacities of India cannot be turned on to this respiratory syndrome, this respiratory disease, and why as we move away from lockdown, that the government of India, the scientists of India, the public health authorities of India and the communities of India can put in place a solid, strong public health surveillance system that will continue to control this disease while we await longer-term solutions.
Thank you very much. Let's take a few more questions. Our friend Jamie Keaton from Associated Press. Jamie?
Hi, Tarek. Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to the issue of funding from your biggest donor, the United States, especially given that Secretary of State Pompeo and other State Department officials a short while ago again criticized WHO and spoke about the halt to U.S. funding for the agency. Yesterday, a WHO spokeswoman told us reporters here in Geneva that 81% of the WHO's $5.8 billion budget for this year and next is funded from donors already, including $1 billion for emergencies. If you are that well funded, shouldn't WHO be able to easily get through this 60 to 90 day pause, as they call it, in any new funding from the United States that was announced by the Trump administration, and that the concrete impact of that temporary halt to funding is simply exaggerated? And if I might, Dr. Tedros, if I might, some U.S. lawmakers say they want you to resign in order for the U.S. to resume funding. Are you considering that? Thank you.
Hi, Jamie. I don't think you've seen me doing too much complaining. I'm way too busy getting on with putting teams all over the world, quite frankly.